What happens when a police officer lies under oath, only to find out the woman he accused is a Navy SEAL commander who spent her life leading soldiers into combat? The courtroom was quiet enough to hear the scratch of the clerk's pen, the kind of silence that makes every word heavier, sharper, impossible to ignore. On the witness stand sat Officer Travis Olander, 41 years old, uniform crisp, voice carrying the steady authority of a man used to being obeyed. He didn't hesitate as he spoke. He didn't stumble. He looked at the jury with practiced ease, the kind of gaze that says, "Trust me, I've done this before." On the night in question, Olander said, leaning slightly toward the microphone, the defendant became combative. She raised her voice. She refused to follow lawful instructions, and she presented herself as a threat to my safety and the safety of others. Every sentence was clear, every pause intentional. He painted a picture for the 12 people in the jury box. A hostile black woman, unpredictable, dangerous, unwilling to respect authority. His words hung in the air like smoke, and for a moment, some of the jurors seemed to breathe it in. At the defense table sat Celine Braxton, 38 years old, black, dressed in a fitted slate gray blazer, her posture as straight as a drawn blade. Her hands rested calmly on the polished wood surface. She did not interrupt. She did not roll her eyes or shake her head like many in her position might. She simply listened, her expression controlled, almost indifferent. The contrast was striking. On one side, a uniform, a badge, a testimony delivered with confidence. On the other, a silent woman in professional attire, allowing the words against her to pile up without protest. To many in the room, it looked unbalanced, like Olander was winning before the real fight had even begun. The prosecutor's lips curved into a faint smile as Olander continued. I gave her multiple opportunities to comply. Instead, she raised her voice and said she didn't have to listen to me. She resisted arrest. I was forced to use minimal restraint to ensure the situation didn't escalate further. Minimal restraint. The phrase hung there, calculated, designed to sound controlled, reasonable, harmless. The kind of phrase jurors have heard before in stories about police officers doing their jobs. Celine's attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Justine Rollins, scribbled notes but did not interrupt either. She knew the rhythm of trials, the way silence could sometimes reveal more than argument. And Celine's silence was deliberate, even if most people in the room didn't yet understand it. One juror, an older man in a beige jacket, leaned slightly forward, his brow furrowed. Maybe he believed Olander. Maybe he wasn't sure. The room seemed to tilt in that direction, toward the officer's version of events, toward the familiar narrative of a law enforcement officer dealing with an uncooperative civilian. Olander's voice carried again, steady and rehearsed. She told me outright that I didn't know who I was dealing with. That's a direct threat in my line of work. I had no choice but to take control before things spiraled. The words seemed damning. Who in the jury could ignore a line like that? A defendant warning a police officer that he didn't know who he was dealing with. It played directly into stereotypes, arrogance, hostility, danger. And yet, at the defense table, Celine did not flinch. She glanced once at her attorney, then back to the witness stand. No reaction, no visible crack in her composure. Her calmness wasn't submission. It was something else, though most in the room couldn't see it yet. The judge, Corwin Keene, sat high above it all. His expression gave away nothing, but his eyes stayed locked on Olander as the testimony unfolded. He had seen countless witnesses over his career, liars, truth-tellers, men and women caught somewhere between the two. There was something in Olander's confidence that was worth watching closely. Meanwhile, the gallery behind the railing filled with whispers and shifting bodies. A woman in the second row whispered to her neighbor, shaking her head as if the officer's words were proof enough. Another man crossed his arms, skeptical but listening. Everyone waited for the defense to speak, for Celine to answer, for something to break the stillness that her silence created. But nothing came. Not yet. Instead, Olander continued, pressing his version of the story further. He gestured once toward Celine, pointing as though the distance between them wasn't enough to separate them. I acted with restraint. I treated her with respect until she left me no choice. That's the truth. The jury scribbled notes. The prosecutor looked satisfied. The officer looked unshakable. And Celine Braxton? She simply sat there, blazer sharp against the table's dark wood, gaze steady, lips pressed in silence. It looked like a lopsided battle, one side with authority and narrative power, the other sitting mute. But the silence was not weakness, it was patience. And patience has a way of changing everything. But soon, the cracks in Olander's story would begin to show. The prosecutor sat down with a satisfied glance, his pen clicking shut as though the case were already sewn up. But the room shifted when Justine Rollins rose from her chair. She was tall, composed, her dark green suit cut clean and professional. There was no hesitation in the way she walked toward the witness stand, no wasted motion. She stopped only a few feet from Officer Travis Olander, fixing him with a look that seemed almost casual but carried weight. "Officer Olander," she began, voice calm, almost conversational, "you testified that my client, Ms. Braxton, raised her voice and became combative during this so-called routine stop. Is that correct?" "Yes," Olander replied without hesitation. His shoulders stayed square, chin tilted slightly upward. "And you also testified," Justine continued, flipping through her notes, "that she said you didn't know who you were dealing with, correct?" Olander nodded once. "That's right." Justine paused for effect, letting her gaze drift toward the jury. "Tell me, officer, was your body camera operational that evening?" The question hung in the air. Olander blinked, then shifted slightly in his chair. "Yes," he said carefully. "Excellent," Justine replied smoothly. "And have you reviewed the footage prior to giving this testimony?" Olander cleared his throat. "I have." "And in that footage, does Ms. Braxton at any point physically threaten you?" "No." The word came quicker than he intended, and a few jurors caught the slip in tone. Justine let the silence stretch just long enough before speaking again. "Does she raise her hands toward you?" "No," Olander said again, this time slower. "Does she strike you, push you, or make any physical contact whatsoever?" "No." The jury scribbled. A woman in the back row tilted her head. The rhythm of the testimony had changed, the officer's confident tone beginning to thin under the pressure of sharp, clean questions. Justine leaned on the podium, her voice steady but firm. "So, to be clear, your entire testimony rests on the claim that Miss Braxton raised her voice and spoke words you interpreted as a threat. That's what made her dangerous, correct?" Olander's jaw flexed. "Verbal threats can be just as dangerous as physical ones, counsel." "Of course," Justine replied quickly, not giving him the satisfaction of winning that line. "But the footage does not show her threatening you physically, and it does not show her resisting in the way you've described. Correct?" There was a pause. Olander shifted again. "That's one interpretation," he muttered. The tension in the room thickened. Jurors glanced at one another. The officer who had seemed untouchable only minutes ago was showing the first cracks in his armor. Celine Braxton remained still at the defense table, her eyes steady on Olander, but her composure wasn't passive. Every inch of her posture spoke of quiet control. She didn't need to react because the truth was beginning to inch its way into the light. Justine pressed further. "Officer Olander, do you recall what time this stop occurred?" "Yes, approximately 9:40 p.m. "And where?" "On Westlake Avenue near the intersection with 9th Street, downtown Seattle." Justine held up a document. "Officer, are you aware that the traffic cameras on 9th Street captured portions of this encounter?" For the first time, Olander's eyes darted toward the prosecutor's table, a flicker of unease betraying him before he quickly covered it with a firm nod. "Yes, I'm aware." Justine let the jury absorb that. The cameras, the footage, the idea that his version of events could be measured against an unblinking eye. She leaned in slightly, her voice lowering but carrying through the room. "Officer, in your sworn statement filed after the arrest, you wrote that Ms. Braxton's words were, 'I don't have to listen to this.' Do you see that written here?" She held the paper in front of him. Olander hesitated before answering. "Yes. And yet, today, under oath, you testified she said, 'You don't know who you're dealing with.' Those are not the same words, are they?" The room went still. Even the sound of the ceiling fan seemed to pause. Olander exhaled sharply through his nose. "No, they're not the same." Justine let the answer sit, then turned to the jury again. "Ladies and gentlemen, words matter. Testimony matters. Accuracy matters. When a person in authority changes their story, you have to ask yourself why the officer's composure was slipping. He gripped the arms of the witness chair, jaw working harder now. Celine didn't move, didn't speak. Her silence was still her weapon, and now the jury could feel its weight. But Justine wasn't finished. Officer Olander, would you agree that as a law enforcement officer, your credibility is central to this case? Yes. And would you also agree that inconsistencies in your testimony could damage that credibility? Yes. Her voice sharpened. Then perhaps you'd like to explain to this court why your written report and your sworn words here today do not match. The gallery erupted in whispers. One juror scribbled so fast the pencil nearly snapped. Olander's eyes narrowed, but the confidence that once carried his testimony was no longer unbreakable. But the real shock hadn't come yet. That would arrive when the judge spoke next. The gavel struck once, sharp and deliberate, pulling the gallery back into silence. Judge Corwin Keene leaned forward on the bench, his eyes locked on the officer who had just finished trying to patch his shaky testimony. His tone carried no anger, but it cut through the room like steel. "Officer Olander," Judge Keene said, "this court values accuracy above all else. Before we move further, there is something the record must reflect." The jurors shifted in their seats, unsure of what was coming. Olander straightened up, his back stiff as if bracing for impact. At the defense table, Celine Braxton finally lifted her gaze toward the judge, her expression unchanged, her hands still folded neatly on the table. Judge Keene spoke slowly, with the weight of every syllable pressing down on the room. For clarity, the defendant in this case, Ms. Celine Braxton, is not an ordinary civilian. She is a commander in the United States Navy SEALs, with more than 15 years of distinguished service and multiple commendations. The air shifted instantly. It was like the ground had tilted beneath everyone at once. Murmurs rippled through the gallery, some sharp gasps cutting across the silence. A young man in the back row muttered under his breath, "No way." The jurors glanced at one another, their pens hovering in midair. Some blinked in surprise, others leaned back as though needing more space to process what they had just heard. The image of Celine sitting at the defense table, quiet, composed, blazer pressed perfectly, suddenly looked different. She wasn't just a defendant anymore. She wasn't the woman Olander had tried to paint as combative or reckless. She was someone who had led soldiers into the most dangerous missions, someone who lived by discipline and structure that few in the room could even fathom. All eyes darted back to Olander. The authority that once wrapped around his uniform now looked fragile, like a thin coat of paint about to peel away. He cleared his throat but said nothing, jaw tightening as though the words caught in his mouth. Justine Rollins seized the moment, stepping back into the frame with surgical precision. She looked directly at the jury before turning her gaze to Olander. "So," she began, her voice firm but calm, "the woman you describe as reckless and combative has dedicated her life to serving this country, protecting its citizens, and leading some of the most disciplined forces in the world. Would you still have this jury believe she is incapable of respect and self-control?" Olander swallowed, the microphone catching the faint sound. "Military experience doesn't make someone above the law," he muttered. "No," Justine shot back, "but it does make her credibility worth weighing very carefully against yours." The jury leaned forward again, the weight of the judge's announcement reshaping the trial in front of their eyes. The man in the beige jacket who earlier leaned toward Olander now tapped his pen slowly, eyes flicking between the officer and Celine. He wasn't buying the same story anymore. Celine finally broke her silence. Her voice was low, clear, and steady, carrying the weight of command without raising in volume. "I didn't threaten him. I didn't resist. I told him that I knew my rights, and that seemed to offend him." Her words weren't emotional. They were matter of fact, delivered with the same measured tone she might have used in a briefing room. That tone didn't just land with the jury. It settled like a stone in Olander's chest. Justine turned back to the officer. "Tell us, officer, were you aware of Ms. Braxton's background when you filed your report?" Olander shifted in his seat, eyes darting briefly toward the prosecutor's table again. "No," he admitted. "Then when you wrote that, she said, 'You don't know who you're dealing with.' Could it be possible you twisted her words to fit a narrative? That maybe what she actually said was closer to, 'I know my rights'?" Olander's lips pressed into a thin line. He said nothing. The silence in the courtroom spoke louder than any admission. The jurors scribbled faster. The gallery whispered again, but the judge's glare shut it down quickly. Celine's calm voice came once more, this time looking directly at the officer. When you stopped me, you treated me like I was a threat before I even said a word. You saw what you wanted to see. The gallery stirred again. Olander clenched his fists against the arms of the witness chair, his knuckles paling. The certainty he once wore like armor was cracking piece by piece. Judge Keene leaned back, his voice steady but firm. This court will consider the full weight of the evidence, including the service record of the defendant. Credibility is not assumed, it is earned. And at this point, Officer Olander, the jury is entitled to weigh yours against hers. The moment landed with finality. Celine did not look triumphant. She didn't need to. Her composure said everything. Truth didn't require celebration, only patience. But the clash between Olander and Celine was only beginning to ignite. The tension that followed Judge Keene's words clung to the room like static. Officer Travis Olander's jaw set harder, his confidence slipping, but not gone. He leaned into the microphone again, his voice pitched lower, almost defensive. With all due respect, Your Honor, I wasn't aware of Ms. Braxton's military background at the time of the incident. My decisions were based on her behavior in that moment. Justine Rollins didn't give him room to recover. She stepped forward, arms folded lightly, the posture of someone who had no need to raise her voice. And what behavior exactly justified your escalation, officer? Her words? Her tone? Or the fact that she didn't fit your picture of obedience? Olander snapped back, sharper than before. She refused lawful commands. That's the bottom line. Celine finally turned her head, meeting his stare from across the courtroom. Her voice cut through the silence, steady but edged with iron. Lawful commands, Officer Olander, or commands you gave because you thought you could get away with it? A few gasps came from the gallery. The jurors shifted again, eyes darting between the two like spectators at a boxing match. Olander's chest rose and fell quicker now, a sheen of sweat beginning to form near his temple. Justine didn't miss a beat. Let's clarify. You've testified she raised her voice. You've testified she resisted. Yet, under questioning, you've admitted she made no physical contact with you. So, we are left with words. Officer Olander, you swore to uphold the truth. Why do your words keep changing? The officer bristled, his grip tightening on the armrest. I'm not changing my words. I'm telling you how it happened. Celine leaned forward, her hands clasped neatly in front of her, her voice level. If I may, Your Honor. Judge Keene nodded. You may speak, Commander. Celine looked straight at Olander. Do you know what it's like to train men and women who jump out of planes into hostile ground, who swim miles through black water with 70 pounds of gear, who hold their breath while explosives are wired beneath them? Do you know what discipline it takes not to panic, not to lose control when every instinct in your body tells you to? I do. I've lived it for 15 years. And you expect this court to believe I lost control because I raised my voice during a traffic stop? The words landed like thunder. The jury froze, absorbing her tone. Not angry, not pleading, but undeniable. Even the gallery seemed to forget to breathe. Olander's lips parted, but no words came. He tried to swallow, tried to recover the air of authority that had slipped from him, but the weight of her record now bore down on every syllable he might attempt. Justine stepped closer to the stand. Officer Olander, would you say your role requires discipline? Yes, he said through clenched teeth. And do you believe someone entrusted to command Navy SEALs might also possess discipline? Yes. Then how do you reconcile that with the story you've told this jury? That a woman who has spent her life leading, strategizing, and serving suddenly became a loose cannon during a simple stop on Westlake Avenue? The silence that followed stretched long enough for the point to burn into every juror's mind. Celine spoke again, softer this time, but no less powerful. What you saw wasn't aggression, officer. It was me refusing to shrink. That sentence seemed to hang in the air like a banner. The jurors scribbled furiously. A woman in the front row of the gallery wiped her eyes discreetly. Olander shook his head, voice rising now. She was confrontational. You weren't there. You don't know what I... Control yourself, officer, Judge Keene interjected sharply, his voice cutting through the officer's outburst. The reprimand hit hard, echoing against the walls. Olander's face reddened, his breath shallow as he forced himself back into silence. Justine tilted her head slightly, watching him. Your Honor, I think the jury has just seen what happens when this officer feels challenged. Imagine how much stronger that reaction must have been on a dark street with no witnesses. A ripple of recognition moved across the jury box. The picture was shifting. Olander wasn't the cool, steady professional he had first appeared to be. His cracks were widening under pressure, and Celine's composure only highlighted the contrast. Judge Keene folded his hands. "We will proceed carefully. This court will consider testimony and evidence, not assumptions. But I will remind everyone present, decorum must be maintained." The warning settled the room back into order, though the energy had shifted entirely. Celine Braxton was no longer the silent figure at the defense table. She had spoken, and with just a few sentences, she had stripped Olander of the narrative he had tried to build. But the story of what really happened that night had yet to be told, and when it came out, it would change everything. The courtroom shifted again when Justine Rollins adjusted her glasses, her hands sliding a stack of papers across the defense table. "Commander Braxton," she said, turning toward her client, "I'd like you to explain in your own words what happened that night." Celine sat straighter, her blazer catching the faint light from above. She didn't rush. When she spoke, her voice was calm, every syllable measured. "I was driving home from a late meeting at the naval base in Bremerton. I'd just crossed into downtown Seattle when the officer pulled me over on Westlake Avenue. I wasn't speeding. I wasn't swerving. He claimed my taillight was out. It wasn't—" The jury leaned in, pens poised. Celine's eyes moved briefly toward Olander before returning to the jury. When I lowered my window, the first thing he said wasn't a greeting. He asked me why I was out so late. I told him I was heading home. He asked for my license and registration, which I gave him. He looked at them, then asked if the car was really mine. Murmurs spread through the gallery. Justine let the words hang, giving the jury space to feel the implication. Celine continued, steady and clear. "I asked if there was an issue beyond the supposed tail light. He repeated the question about my car. I said again it was mine. He told me to step out of the vehicle. I asked why. He raised his voice. That was the first time mine rose too." Her tone never shifted into anger as she relived the memory, but the contrast was stark. She was recalling facts, not spinning stories. Justine moved closer. "What did you say specifically?" Celine looked straight at the jurors. "I said, I know my rights. That's all. Not, you don't know who you're dealing with. Not a threat. Just that I knew my rights." The jurors wrote quickly, their expressions tightening. Celine's eyes softened for the first time, the memory pulling at her. "He told me if I didn't comply, he would have to take me in." He stepped closer to the car, put his hand on the door. At that point, I asked if his body camera was on. He told me it was. I said good, because I wanted everything recorded. She paused. Her hands, still folded, pressed tighter for just a moment before she released them. That's when his tone changed. He grabbed my arm when I stepped out, even though I didn't resist. And in his report, he wrote that I was combative. He wrote that I resisted arrest. None of that is true. The gallery buzzed, whispers like a low tide pulling in and out, until Judge Keene's gavel slammed once. "Order." Celine exhaled slowly, then turned her eyes back to Olander. "I've been in war zones. I've been shot at. I've carried men twice my size when they were bleeding out, and I've done it without losing focus. Do you honestly believe I'd risk my career, my life's work, by lashing out at a traffic stop over a taillight that wasn't even broken?" The words cut deep. Olander's face hardened, but the jurors' eyes told a different story. The man in the beige jacket had stopped taking notes altogether, now staring openly at Olander as if weighing every line he had spoken earlier. Justine stepped in again, her voice low but sharp. "Commander Braxton, did you resist Officer Olander?" "No." "Did you threaten him?" "No." "Did you, at any point, make physical contact with him?" "No." "And what happened after he put his hands on you?" Celine's jaw tightened. "He cuffed me, hauled me to the patrol car, told me I was going to regret making things difficult, and I stayed silent because I knew the camera was running." A murmur ran through the room again, but this time it felt heavier, closer to outrage. The story was no longer abstract, it was concrete, human, painfully believable. Justine turned toward the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you've just heard is a decorated commander explaining how she was treated like a criminal over a taillight that wasn't broken. She didn't resist. She didn't threaten. She asked questions. And for that, she was arrested." Celine didn't gloat, didn't smile. She simply lowered her hands back to the table, her composure intact. Her silence after speaking only made her words echo louder. Olander shifted again in his chair, eyes narrowing, his jaw working overtime. He was losing control of the story. But once witnesses and evidence began to surface, even his last defenses would start to crumble. The air in the courtroom felt tighter now, as if everyone was leaning forward in their seats, waiting for the next blow. Judge Keene adjusted his glasses, glancing at the stack of exhibits on the clerk's desk. Ms. Rollins, do you have any supporting evidence to submit at this stage? Justine gave a small nod. Yes, Your Honor. The defense would like to enter Exhibit C, traffic camera footage from 9th Street, time-stamped 9:41 p.m., the evening of the alleged incident. The clerk wheeled a monitor into place. The jurors straightened, their pens set down for the first time all day. A screen flickered on, grainy at first, then steady. The image showed Celine's vehicle pulled over to the side of Westlake Avenue, red brake lights glowing. Olander's patrol car sat behind it, the officer's figure moving toward her driver's side window. Play it through, Judge Keene instructed. The footage ran in silence. Olander's gestures were visible, abrupt, sharp, almost looming as he leaned into the window. Celine's figure inside the car moved slowly, deliberately, before extending her arm with documents. No sudden movements, no physical aggression. A few jurors leaned closer. One woman's eyebrows rose. The next angle, caught by a traffic camera further down, showed the officer pulling open the car door. Celine stepped out. Her posture was upright, her movements calm. But Olander's hand grabbed her arm almost immediately, steering her toward the patrol car. Justine let it play until Olander placed cuffs on Celine. She paused the video there, the image frozen on the screen, Celine standing straight, unresisting, her hands being pulled behind her back. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Justine said, turning toward them, this is the woman Officer Olander has described as combative, threatening, and dangerous. I ask you to compare his words with what your own eyes have just seen. Silence stretched across the courtroom, but it wasn't empty. It was thick with the weight of disbelief. Olander shifted in the witness chair, his throat tightening. The footage doesn't capture the whole exchange, he muttered. It doesn't record tone of voice. It doesn't show the threat in her words. Justine pounced. Tone of voice, officer? Or your interpretation of it? Because the footage shows restraint on her part, not yours. The footage shows her standing still while you escalated the situation. Would you like to explain to the jury why your report describes her as resisting when the footage clearly shows otherwise? Olander's lips pressed thin. He glanced toward the prosecutor, who avoided eye contact. Celine leaned forward, her voice steady but resonant. I didn't resist because I've learned that when people like him want control, resistance only feeds the fire. I knew the camera was rolling. I trusted the truth would eventually come out. The jury's expressions shifted again. A man in the back row scribbled furiously, underlining words in his notes. Another juror set her pen down, staring at Olander with narrowed eyes. Judge Keene cleared his throat. Officer Olander, the discrepancy between your report and the footage is significant. Can you account for it? Olander's face flushed. His voice cracked as he tried to recover. I recorded what I perceived in the moment. Officers don't always have the luxury of replaying events like a video. We make judgments quickly, and I judged her behavior as a threat. Justine stepped closer, her tone sharp but controlled. Judgment is one thing. Fabrication is another. The footage shows she complied. She handed you her documents. She stepped out when you asked. She didn't strike you, didn't run, didn't fight. So again, officer, why did you write otherwise? The room went still. Olander's breathing grew heavier, his hands tightening into fists on the armrests. For the first time, his authority looked brittle, his uniform less like armor and more like a mask slipping out of place. Celine's eyes never left him. You wrote me as hostile because that's what you wanted them to believe, not because that's what happened. The sentence struck harder than any evidence. Her tone wasn't loud, but it carried truth like a blade, sharp, undeniable. The gallery broke into quiet murmurs again, louder this time, until the judge's gavel came down twice, but the impression had already sunk in. The officer's credibility was crumbling in front of everyone. Olander opened his mouth as if to lash back, but he caught the judge's stare and stopped. Instead, he shifted his weight, looking trapped in the very chair where he once sat so confidently. Justine turned, walking slowly back to the defense table. No further questions at this time, Your Honor. The jury didn't look at Olander as he stepped down. Their eyes followed Celine instead, measuring the calm presence she carried, the discipline that never once faltered. The tide had turned, and everyone could feel it. But the case wasn't over yet. The verdict still loomed, and with it, the lesson that this trial was about more than just one false report. The courtroom was heavy with silence as Officer Olander stepped down from the witness stand. His walk back to the prosecution's table lacked the confidence he had carried at the start of the trial. His shoulders hunched slightly, his gaze darting around the room, but never meeting the jurors. That image, his retreat, spoke louder than his testimony ever had. Judge Keene straightened, his voice carrying authority that filled the chamber. We will now move to closing arguments. Counsel, proceed. The prosecutor rose first, smoothing his tie, but his words no longer carried the same force. He tried to remind the jury of the officer's years of service, of the supposed dangers faced by law enforcement every day. He leaned on fear, asking jurors to imagine what could have happened if Celine had been aggressive, if the situation had spiraled. But the problem was clear. The ifs and could-haves no longer matched what the footage showed. His argument felt thin, and the jurors' faces revealed little interest. When it was Justine Rollins' turn, she didn't waste time. She walked directly in front of the jury box, resting one hand on the railing, her voice calm but resonant. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is not about speculation. It is not about what might have happened. It is about what did happen. You saw it with your own eyes. You heard Commander Braxton's testimony. You compared her words with the footage, and you compared her composure with Officer Olander's shifting story. She paused, letting the silence hang for just a beat. You've seen the truth. And the truth does not bend to uniforms, badges, or authority when authority is abused. Her gaze moved across each juror. The question you face is simple. Do you reward falsehoods, or do you honor the truth? She stepped back, nodded once to Celine, and returned to her seat. The judge gave the jury their instructions, his voice even, precise. Then they were led from the room to deliberate. The gallery broke into hushed conversation, the energy buzzing with anticipation. Celine remained still, hands folded, her expression unchanged. She'd learned long ago that waiting with patience could be as powerful as any action. Minutes stretched into an hour, then longer. The jurors returned, their faces solemn, papers in hand. Everyone in the gallery straightened, the atmosphere thick with expectation. The foreperson stood. We, the jury, find the defendant, Celine Braxton, not guilty. The words cracked through the courtroom like a release valve. A rush of air, whispers rising and falling, some clapping muffled quickly by the bailiff. Celine closed her eyes once, slow and deliberate, then opened them again. She didn't smile, didn't cry, she simply breathed. A quiet exhale of truth affirmed. Judge Keene raised a hand. This court thanks the jury for its service. Commander Braxton, you are free to go. Officer Olander, this court strongly recommends a review of your conduct by the department. Truth is the foundation of justice. Without it, this system cannot function. Olander stared at the table in front of him, his authority stripped bare. The badge on his chest no longer glimmered with the same weight. As the courtroom emptied, a woman in the gallery whispered to her neighbor, I can't believe she went through all that, and still held herself together like that. The neighbor shook his head slowly. Makes you wonder how many others never get their truth heard. Celine rose, her blazer catching the light again. She shook Justine's hand firmly. Thank you. Justine's reply was simple. You did more for yourself than I ever could. Celine glanced once more at the jury box, now empty, and then turned toward the door. She walked with the same measured stride she'd entered with. No triumph, no arrogance, only dignity. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered, microphones thrust forward. Commander Braxton, do you have a statement? One shouted. She stopped briefly, eyes level with the crowd. Yes. Don't judge a person by the story someone else tells about them. Watch what they do. Watch how they carry themselves. Truth doesn't always speak loud, but it holds. That's all. She walked away, her silhouette steady against the evening light, a reminder of what discipline and patience can withstand. This wasn't just a verdict about one officer's lie or one woman's defense. It was a lesson, hammered into the foundation of the courtroom itself. You cannot silence truth forever. You cannot crush dignity that refuses to bend, and you cannot measure someone's worth by assumptions. Because sometimes, the strongest thing a person can do is sit in silence, knowing that the truth will speak for them when the moment comes. If you believe in stories that reveal the power of truth and resilience, make sure to subscribe for more, because what we watch and share reminds us all that justice, even when tested, can still prevail.